Gor Claw is super cool. It makes your creature spells that are big cost 2 less to cast, and whenever it attacks, each creature you control with power 4 or greater gets 1/1 and trample till end of turn. I thought this was a mighty great opportunity to put in some Eldrazi's into a mono green deck. There are a lot of green Eldrazi's, and I think it's just really fun. Disclaimer though, there are no Eldrazi Titans in this deck, and I think it kind of takes away from the charm of the deck if you just throw in the most expensive stuff. Anyway, you can do that if you want, but I have chosen not to for the purposes of $100 or less. A lot of these green Eldrazi's create spawns, and so we'll start with some spawn tokens. We have Kozilek's Predator, Nest Invader, and Warped Tusker, all of which create little spawn tokens. Warped Tusker says when you cast it or cycle it, you make the token, which is slightly different than the other two, but it's essentially the same. Then we've got Chittering Dispatcher and Eldrazi Repurposer. These two also make little spawns. Chittering Dispatcher, when it leaves the battlefield, you create one. And it's really cool because it's got myriad, so you just create tokens, and then when those leave, you make the things. It's pretty cool. And then Eldrazi Repurposer is another cast trigger, and when it dies, so that's pretty awesome. We've got a Skittering Invasion, which it just puts 5 Scions onto the battlefield. Nothing too flashy here. Glaring Fleshraker says whenever you cast a colorless spell, you create a spawn, and whenever another colorless creature enters under your control, it does 1 damage to each opponent, which is pretty awesome because then you cast one and then you make another one, and that you just deal in damage left and right. Propagator Drone says your creature tokens have evolved, so all your Scions will evolve as other things come in, and it can create a Scion with its activated ability. Idol of False Gods is an artifact that creates Scions as well, and whenever another Eldrazi you control dies, you put a +1/+1 counter on it, so when those spawns get sacrificed for mana, this will get bigger, and then as long as it's got 80 or more, it becomes a creature with Annihilator 2, and that's pretty yucky for everybody else. And Awakening Zone is an enchantment that says at the beginning of our upkeep, we make a spawn token. Pretty great. Path of Annihilation is another enchantment. It says whenever it enters, you create 2 Eldrazi Spawn tokens, and gives all your Eldrazi's the ability to tap for 1 mana of any color. And whenever you cast a creature spell with mana 7 or greater, you gain 4 life. Lots of things going on here, but most importantly, you can cast those green spells with your Eldrazi Spawn if you'd like, and then sacrifice them immediately for that mana. It's a really good card. Alright, moving on to some things that help the spawns specifically out. I think this section is pretty underutilized, but I really like it. Malevolent Rumbles is a sorcery. It says reveal the top 4 cards of your library. Put a permanent card from among them into your hand, put the rest in your graveyard, and then you create a spawn. So it's not directly creating a spawn like as its intention, is kind of an afterthought, but you do get a search for permanents from the top of your deck. Hand of Emrakul is a super expensive creature, but you can sacrifice 4 spawns rather than pay its mana cost. So I don't know, spawns are almost free, and then so you just sacrifice 4 of them, you got a 7/7 with Annihilator 1. Yeah, that's pretty cool. Brood Warden gives all your spawns +2/+1, so they all become 2/2s. That's pretty cool. And then Deathless Behemoth says you can sacrifice 2 Eldrazi Scions, return it from the graveyard to your hand as activate as a sorcery. Well, you may have noticed that this says Scions, not spawns, which brings me to the next section, which is the Scion section. They changed the spawns to Scions in Battle for Zendikar. There's really no difference other than they get 1 extra power. But anyways, we'll start with Call the Scions. Of course, you put 2 1/1 Scions onto the battlefield, and they sacrifice to add 1 colorless mana to your mana pool. Brood Monitor, Eyeless Watcher, and Scion Summoner, all similar to the original ones that we first talked about, but they create Eldrazi Scions when they enter. Birthing Hulk, Blight Herder, and Vile Redeemer, kind of the same. They make Scions in different ways, and I just think that's pretty awesome. Void Attendant is really kind of cool. Pay 1 and a green to put a card an opponent owns from exile into their graveyard, and then you create a Scion. That's really cool for a lot of these new decks that are stealing things from exile or what have you. So I think this is a really neat card nowadays. I don't know, it can't be overlooked. From Beyond, another enchantment. At the beginning of your upkeep, put a Scion onto the battlefield, so similar to the previous one we saw. And then you can sacrifice it to search for an Eldrazi into your hand. So that's an extra added bonus. Next section is where I guess it's kind of card draw, kind of just searching for stuff, trying to get ahead, that kind of stuff. Ancient Stirrings, Elven Farsight, and Nissa's Revelation. They're all looking through the top of your deck and trying to find the cards you want. Not really much else to be said about it. This is Revelation. It's expensive, but you draw cards equal to a creature's power if it's on top, and the gain life is equal to its toughness. So that could be pretty cool. Pretty good spot for the Titans if you want to put those in here. So I don't know. Territory color. This one's new. On its landfall, whenever a land enters the battlefield under control, look at the top card of your library. If it's a creature, put it in your hand. If you don't, you may put it in your graveyard. So you kind of sift through all your stuff as you're going. Explore and harmonize, of course, drawing cards and putting an extra land from your hand on the battlefield. That's kind of nice. Beast Whisperer and Emrakul's Influence. Each one you cast creature spells, you can draw a card. And Emrakul's Influence might not trigger as much as the other one, but when you cast an Eldrazi with CMC 7 or greater, you draw 2 cards. So that's awesome. Colossal Majesty, of course, on our upkeep. If you control a creature with power 4 or greater, we'll draw a card. So, I don't know, classic green card here. Fecundity, whenever a creature dies, that creature's controller may draw a card. Sure, this helps everybody else, but just imagine how many things are going to be sacrificing constantly in this deck. Got so many spawns and scions going off left and right that we're just going to be drawing a ton of cards from this thing. So I don't know if it matters that other people are drawing cards as well. Keeper of Fables, when our non-human creatures deal combat damage to a player, we draw a card, and our commander gives them trample, so that should be easy to do. Multani's Presence, I don't know if this is strictly necessary, but it's a 1 green mana enchantment. It says whenever you play a spell and it's countered, you draw a card. This is Eldrazi after all, so I'm sure something's going to get countered, and which means we'll draw cards off of it, so we can't feel too bad. All right, let's move on to like the ramp, cost reductions, dorks, that kind of stuff. This is Conduit of Ruin, and It That Heralds the End. Oh, and Ugin the Ineffable. Those are pretty cool to make all your colorless spells cost less. Conduit of Ruin is just your first spell, and when it enters, you look for a really big Eldrazi, put that card on top, and then It That Heralds the End is an Anthem effect as well, and Ugin the Ineffable is just some stuff, but we're mostly looking at the colorless spells cost 2 less to cast. That's awesome. Drum Hunter, Fanatic of Ronus, and Nightshade Dryad, they're all dorks. Drum Hunter's cool because if you've got a big creature, you draw a card at the end of your turn. Fanatic of Ronus taps for green if we've got a big creature, and it's got Eternalize. And Nightshade Dryad is actually really important because you can tap to add 1 mana of any color, but also the colorless just in case you need that specific colorless mana for an Eldrazi spell. Growth Spasm, Ruin in Their Wake, and Sowing Myco Spawn all search for basic lands onto the battlefield. Ruin in Their Wake once wastes, and then Growth Spasm makes another spawn token, and Sowing Myco Spawn, if you kick it, you can exile a target land. So that'll make someone angry. And speaking of making people angry, we got some answers or removal, or however you want to say this. We got Animist's Might and Unnatural Aggression. They're kind of just fight spells, I guess, just killing creatures with your creatures. Nothing too fancy. Collective Resistance, Fade into Antiquity, and Mockery of Nature. They all get rid of artifacts and or enchantments. I like the Fade into Antiquity because when you exile something, you know, the Eldrazi's like that. That's all I'm gonna say. Thief of Existence and World Breaker. Both of them also exile something. Thief of Existence says when you cast it, you can exile a non-creature, non-land permanent with mana value 4 or less. And then if Thief of Existence leaves, they'll draw a card, but hey, you exiled their thing. And then World Breaker is when it says when you cast it, you just exile an artifact, enchantment, or land. That is a 5/7 with reach, so that's kind of fun. Titan's Presence says an additional cost to cast a spell. Reveal a colorless creature from your hand, and then you exile a different creature if its power is less than or equal to the revealed card's power. And it's an instance, I don't know. And then Not of This World counters a spell that targets one of your creatures. It's terrible. It's a 7 mana spell. It's a 7 mana counter spell. That's awful. But it's actually free if it targets one of your really big things. So it's actually a fantastic card. All right, we end up with some extras, and there's maybe a couple finishers in here. You know, it was first off, we got Artisan of Kozilek and Walk with the Ancestors. Both of these return things from your graveyard to your hand or battlefield. Artisan of Kozilek is, of course, a 10/9 with Annihilator 2. And Walk with the Ancestors lets us discover 4, sifting through more of our deck. Full Flowering lets us populate X times. That's pretty awesome because we've got a lot of scions and spawns in the deck. So if we can create more of those and create a bunch of mana all at once, that would be really, really good for us. Tamiyo's Safekeeping gives one of our target's permanents indestructible and hexproof, and we gain 2 life. Stone of Erech makes all our opponents hate us. If a creature an opponent controls would die, exile instead, or you can sacrifice it, exile a player's graveyard, and draw a card. That's just annoying. Then we have Forsaken Monument. This is another double anthem, and whenever we tap a permanent for colorless, we add an additional colorless, and then whenever we cast a colorless spell, we gain 2 life. Monstrous Vortex. Whenever we cast a creature spell with power 5 or greater, we'll discover X, where X is the mana value. So that'll just sift through more, like I said before. Lots and lots of sifting. Decimator of the Provinces and Twins of Discord. These are definitely a couple probably finisher cards. Decimator of the Provinces, when it enters, gives all our creatures 2/2 and trample, and it itself has trample and haste. And then Twins of Discord, what says whenever we attack, we can choose odd or even, and then creatures with the mana value of that quality cannot block. Wow. So then, of course, Bloodthirst 2, if an opponent was dealt damage this turn, the permanent with the Bloodthirst ability enters with the 2+1/+1 counters on it when stuff happens. So it makes all our stuff bigger. And for our lands, here's all the lands. We got Crumbling Vestige over there, which when it enters, you add a mana of any color, so that could be good for green. Eldrazi Temple taps for 2. Forest, Ghost Quarter destroys lands, etc., etc. These ones are all great. Got a couple wastes in there just in case, or searching for basic lands if we need to. Anyway, let me know what you guys think of this. Would you add the Titans if you had them? And what would you swap out for them? Thank you, everybody. Make sure you check out that TCGplayer affiliate link in the description below. And thank you so much to my Patreon supporters. I love them so much. And I will see you next week for your weekly dose of Magic.